Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you all. Let me begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, with the name, the attribute, the description of Allah, the God, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. My name is Ismail Bilal Salim, talking to you from Masjid William Salam, and I would like today to provide to you some haqq, for Allah is the haqq. He is the truth. He is the source of all truth. Therefore, everything that I convey on the truth is from Him. Only the errors are my own. I would like to apologize. Next to me is church service is going on, so you may hear some music in the background, but hopefully they keep it to a minimum. I think generally they're about to convene at the beginning of this talk. Now, the last couple of weeks, I told you I'll be talking about Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam. And because this is a talk that I do on Sundays about comparative religion, I want you all to understand that everything that is conveyed here is from different sources, not just Islamic sources, so it will be something to show other people who are non-Muslims, something to convey to other people who are non-Muslims, to get them to understand our stance. And since I'm going to be talking about Jesus, and I'm going to continue to talk about Jesus maybe for the next 2 or 3 weeks, before I delve into his birth, his life, his mission, I want to discuss something that I probably wouldn't have discussed maybe 10 years ago. It has become popular for people who are woke to suggest that Jesus did not exist, that he was something mythical like Zeus or Hercules. I was hesitant to even entertain this weak argument because it is based on conjecture, laziness, and ignorance in my view. It is a cheap argument designed to waste our time. And to some degree, I am doing just that. But on the other hand, I hope to strengthen those who love Jesus and to help them push back on critics who I suspect have never read a scholarly work on the subject, or perhaps never read a book at all. The cardinal sin, the great sin in my view, is to be whimsical with people's beliefs that have been holding it their entire life. Beliefs that people hold dear. Beliefs that guide people when they are in need, in their highs and lows of life. It is irresponsible to attempt to destroy the belief system of other people without providing a viable alternative. Otherwise, you would possibly leave them empty. It's like removing someone's heart without a replacement. Now, it has been said you can silence 40 scholars with one fact, but you can't silence one fool with 40 facts. So it is not my goal to stop them from saying things that are untrue. It is merely my goal to convey to people the truth. So let us begin. Imagine someone asked you to define the word similitude or verisimilitude. I use those words because I remember them from reading the Quran in English as a child. If they asked you to define any word, but they say to you, don't use a dictionary. This is foolish and nonsensical. And it is evidence that the person doesn't really want the answer, but only an argument. The Jesus doesn't exist people say, prove that Jesus doesn't exist, but you can't use the Bible. Think of the idiocy of this assertion. and their demand that you use something other than 27 books by about 17 to 19 authors, including 4 biographies by different authors at different times, writing to different people in different places, inspired by a man that they said does not exist. The reason that they say don't use the Bible is because they have already lost, and they know it. So their job is to trick you into giving away your greatest weapon. I have a book here by an actual scholar. This book is entitled, Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for the Jesus of Nazareth by Bart Ehrman. He has studied his entire life, or his entire adult life, and taught on the life of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam. And he lays the claim to rest without using heavy biblical verses. Bart Ehrman quotes the famous Jewish historian Josephus as follows. At this time, there appeared Jesus, a wise man. He was a doer of startling deeds, a teacher of people who received the truth with pleasure. And he gained a following both among many Jews and among many of the Greek origin. When Pilate, because of an accusation made by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, those who have loved him previously did not cease doing so. And up to this very day, the tribe of Christians named after him have not died out. This is proof from a historian of non-biblical origin that Jesus existed. And it's completely unnecessary because there is tons and tons of more evidence. Let me tell you about a man who lived 2,000 years ago. Even before he was born, it was told that he would be someone special. He had a supernatural being inform his mother that the child that she was going to conceive would not be a mere mortal, but be someone divine. He was born miraculously, and he became unusually precocious as a young man. As an adult, he left home and started his preaching ministry, urging his listeners to live not for material life, but for the spiritual life. He gathered disciples around him and convinced him that his message was divinely inspired because he himself was divine. He proved it to them by doing many miracles, including healing the sick, casting out demons, and raising the dead. But at the end of his life, he arose opposition, and his enemies delivered him to the Roman authorities for judgment. Still, after his life in this world, he returned to meet his followers in order to convince them that he was not really dead, but lived on in a heavenly realm. And after this, his followers wrote books about him. Do you know who this man is? Well, it is not Jesus. His name is Apollonius of Tyana. He was a pagan philosopher and a worshiper of pagan gods. He was an actual person who lived 50 years ago, or 50 years after Jesus. Though Christians at that time said he was an imposter and he was not the real Son of God, and his followers said the same about Jesus. Do you know what they never said? Jesus' followers never said about Apollonius he did not exist, nor did Apollonius' followers say Jesus did not exist. And that would be the easiest attack and the most effective. No one ever said this because everyone knew that it was a fact that both of those men lived. The idea that Jesus did not exist is a new phenomenon that seems to be fading at this point, like all Hotep arguments. Jesus' followers were nicknamed Christians. They didn't name themselves Christians. The Jewish community said these people are always talking about Jesus Christ. So they nicknamed them Christians. This is right after Jesus left this earth. They were nicknamed Christians by other people who were non-Christians. The early Christians, or Christ followers, initially worshiped in the synagogues. You see, Jews see Jesus, alayhi salam, as a false Messiah, not as an imaginary figure. So the Talmud, which is a collection of highly authoritative writings in Judaism, they had very harsh words to say about Jesus and his mother. They called him fake. They called him a false Messiah, a false prophet. And they called his mother a prostitute, called her unchaste. But they never, ever said he or she did not exist. Paul said, first of all, Paul lived during the life of Jesus, alayhi salam. He was a Jewish Pharisee, meaning a rabbi, a very learned person that initially persecuted Christians, the followers of Jesus. And he said he persecuted them beyond measure. So why would he persecute, imprison, and kill the people when he could simply tell them, your Messiah, your whole story is made up? You see, most people were illiterate during antiquity. During the time of Jesus, only 3% of all the Jews in Palestine were literate. 97% of them were illiterate. Paul was proficient in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. Paul could have easily changed the course of Christianity by exposing Jesus as someone who was made up, but he didn't. Paul never said this man did not live. Paul did not say this because he was alive at the same time that Jesus was alive. Paul later converted to Christianity and wrote several letters, or what is conceived or perceived as books, to different people about Jesus. Jesus' disciples were persecuted and killed because of their beliefs. Would they die for a whole story that is made up? There were at least 40 gospels written, and possibly up to 70, and most of them were destroyed. All we have is the 4 in existence currently, and others that were written after. But that means that between 40 and 70 biographies and quotations was of a man who was supposedly never existed. What we do have in Mark is a gospel that was written 35 years after Jesus left this earth. It was written in Greek for a Gentile audience in Rome. Matthew was written 50 years after Jesus. The author wrote for a community of Greek-speaking Jewish Christians located primarily in Syria. Luke wrote about 50 years after Jesus to the Roman authorities, primarily. And John wrote 60 to 70, maybe 80 years after Jesus lived, and this was to people who are already Christians. Luke said several authors had written the biographies of Jesus, but he was going to give an orderly account. What I'm telling you is at least 40 to 70 people wrote different biographies of this man who they say did not exist. The New Testament scholars have discerned that there are 4 sources for the Synoptic Gospels. They see them as Mark, the Gospel Q, the Gospel M, and the Gospel L. Matthew and Luke copied Mark, yet they have stories that are not in Mark. So they had to get their stories from somewhere else. And this is how New Testament scholars get the Gospel Q and the Gospel M and the Gospel L. I don't want to delve deep into this, but the point is, if Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John copy from these Gospels, then that means that they are older Gospels than what is in the Bible, closer to the time of the man Jesus. Bart Ehrman, again a scholar, says within a couple of decades of the traditional date of Jesus' death, we have numerous accounts of his life found in a broad geographical span. In other words, a great number of people were writing about this man, and they were far and wide. and it was very soon after he left this earth. And if numerous people wrote about him, and only 3% of the people could read and write, then a multitude of people were talking about him, because that is how tradition was transmitted, through oral traditions. Paul has the earliest writings of Jesus that we have in existence in our hand today. He wrote about 20 years after Jesus' traditional date of his death. He lived during the time of Jesus. Paul did. He also persecuted Christians. Now, this is what I want you to think about, brothers, assalamu alaikum, and sisters. Paul was persecuting Christians before any books were written. How could he have persecuted them when they did not exist? And how could they exist if they didn't know anything about Jesus, if he was totally made up? Do you understand that he couldn't persecute them if Jesus did not exist? And they wouldn't have anything to believe in if Jesus did not exist. He persecuted them during the time in which right after they were following Jesus. All right? The only thing that they could have existed at that time was oral tradition. People telling other people, did you hear what this man Jesus did? He did some amazing things. And to prove this, the Gospels are written in Greek. But Jesus and the Jews of his time spoke the language Aramaic. So the oral traditions had to be transmitted in Aramaic and then translated into Greek, which means the stories of Jesus were circulating long before the Gospels were even written. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Jesus is quoted as saying, Talitha Kumi. The author of Mark is writing, telling the reader, this means, little girl, I say to you, arise. Jesus is recorded as saying, Ella, Ella, lama sabachthani. The author explains that this means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Words like Messiah and Rabbi and Cephas are all explained to the reader because the reader does not know Aramaic. But the story originated in Aramaic because Jesus' followers really existed and told his words in his language to other people. So the new claim now is that Jesus is a copy of Horus or Mithras or any other person, any other pagan god. Because everyone copied Egypt according to certain woke people. Strangely, these same people do not believe in a God who is a half man who has a falcon's head. But they tell you that this is copied from this man with a falcon's head. They do not believe in a God of creation, and another God of death, and another God of war, and another God of love, etc. These woke people have an aversion to God, and definitely an aversion to multiple gods. But do you know who else had an aversion to multiple gods? Jewish people. So they would never copy Egyptian gods. This man Horus is supposedly had his story copied by Christians and made into Jesus. Let's focus a little bit on him. Horus, who was a man who had a falcon's head, was not born on December 25th. Neither was Jesus, but that's another story. He was not born of a virgin. He is not born with wise men coming to adorn him. He did not preach as a young man. He did not have 12 disciples. He was not crucified, and he was not resurrected. Neither was Mithras or Dionysus or Krishna or Attis or Adonis or Bacchus or Tammuz or Marduk or Tao or Dumuzi or whoever they make up and say these stories are true. It is all made up. There are no historical sources for any of the false claims that they are spewing. In 1999, a man named Timothy Frick and Peter Gandy wrote a book called The Jesus Mystery. Was the original Jesus a pagan god? They asserted that Jesus was a myth and a copy of pagan gods. This is what an actual scholar here, Bart Ehrman, has to say about this. He says, what, for example, is the proof that Osiris is not only Horus, but Osiris is supposedly Jesus is copied from Osiris. He says, what, for example, is the proof that Osiris was born on December 25th, before three shepherds, or that he was crucified, or that his death brought atonement for sins, or that he was returned from the dead and raised from the dead? In fact, this is what he says. In fact, no ancient sources say any such thing about Osiris or any other gods. But Frick and Gandhi claim that this is common knowledge. And they prove it by quoting other writers from the 19th and 20th century who say so. But these writers, too, do not cite any historical evidence. This is not serious historical scholarship. This is what an actual scholar is telling you. It is sensationalist writers driven by a desire to sell books. So today, woke people are following these people hook, line, and sinker. They also say that Jesus was a copy of a multitude of dying and rising gods. This is from an atheist man named Kersey Graves, and his book, The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, or Christianity Before Christ, written in 1875. But Jonathan Z. Smith, an eminent historian of religion at the University of Chicago, says the category of a dying and rising God is largely a misnomer based upon imaginative reconstruction. You know what that means? They made it up in their own minds. He said that these gods fall into two categories: deities that return but had never died, or deities that died and never returned. He says there is no unambiguous instance in the history of religion of a dying and rising deity. It is completely made up. This is an actual historian, scholars saying that the works that they are suggesting that Jesus is a myth is completely made up. Let me give you some more quotations of actual scholars about this nonsensical question that Jesus didn't exist. They do not provide a single piece of documentation for any of their claims. Sources do not exist. Claims are unsubstantiated. There is no evidence. This is made up, simply made up. They cannot cite a single source of any kind, is what is being said about these people's the sources that they bring to say that Jesus didn't exist. Now, I say all of this, and I combine all of this all together to say this to you. In a time when it is being realized that one of the most influential men in the history of the world, a man worshipped as God by 2 billion people and countless billions before today, a man who is followed by 2 billion Muslims, that's 4 billion people, that this man and other people see this man as the savior of all of mankind. This man was a black man. And these woke black folks are touting that this great black man did not exist at all, based upon utter lies from those who are not black. Quite ironic. They are being led by the nose by the very people that they said steered us from African spirituality in the first place. Just to add a cherry on top, did you know that Jesus had 4 brothers and several daughters? 4 brothers and several sisters. Look at Mark 6:3. He had 4 brothers and several sisters. And one of his brothers, James, wrote a letter to the Jewish Christians that he was also martyred for his belief in his brother Jesus. But these people say that Jesus never existed. He had brothers and sisters, and one of his brothers has a book that is written and people read it right now. And they kill him for his belief in his brother Jesus. Listen, this is what I want to end this with. A man named Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. This is a fact. What is in dispute is how we see this man. So the next time someone tells you that Jesus didn't exist, just know that they are completely and utterly wrong. So moving forward, Next week, we'll be delving into this man, Jesus, and his, assalamu alaikum, brother, and his birth, his life, his mission, and ultimately we will get into how this man left this earth. I want to say to you that this entire thing was to prove to you, hopefully once and for all, that this man Jesus actually did live. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.